just before I get into those 2 points, there's something called total stress load, which is not still well known in the medical community. It's better known in the alternative medicine community. It's not standardized yet. It's the sum total of all the stresses on your body: emotional, physical wear and tear, biochemical, nutritional. So all of those things put together equal total stress load. And that total stress load tells you a lot about your risk of getting chronic disease and aging. This is a new area that has just been started to be explored in the last 5 to 7 years. And it's coming up, but it still needs to be standardized. But 2 of the factors in that total stress load are toxic metals and low-grade infections.
This is Uncommonly Remarkable. We have surprisingly casual discussions about the lives and notable accomplishments of community leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyday folks like you and me. Think of this podcast as an opportunity to learn something new and to pick up on an entrepreneurial tip or two through open conversation. I'm Artist Beatty. I'm a doctor of optometry and the chief medical officer for My Eye Doctor OD. Though we will inevitably touch on topics within my area of expertise, the opinions and conversations held here are separate from my work with My Eye Doctor. Welcome to the show. Douglas, welcome to the show, my friend. I am so excited to talk to you today. I often get to talk about healthcare and wellness, mental health, but I don't always get to talk about eyes in the process. And so as we talk through some things today, I think we're going to get a chance maybe to talk about elastin and where it's found and particularly how it affects the eye. But welcome to the show and thank you for taking some time to be with us today.
Hey, listen, thanks so much for having me, because I think the message we're going to be talking about today applies to everyone who's listening to this program, and probably most people haven't heard before.
Well, so let's start then. Let's get people acclimated. So tell us a little bit about you and what you're doing right now, because I think it's pretty exciting, and maybe people can start to frame their reference around that.
That would be fantastic. And just before we start into this, just so that people know, the question I found myself, or the thing that I discovered when I spent so many years looking into this, is why does our immune system turn against all of us starting after the age of 30? And so that is a big question. It's one of the fundamental drivers of aging and chronic disease. And I came into it at both a personal and professional level. The first thing that happened was my father died of heart disease. And when I saw that happen, I started checking into my family history and realized that, heart disease doesn't run in my family. It kind of gallops. And so I realized that I was on that path and that I'd better do something about it, because the traditional answers, putting people on statins and all this stuff, there was some good stuff there, but it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me as to how it addressed the fundamental triggers for cardiovascular disease. And in particular, how our immune system turns against us as we start to age. The other side of that coin was curiosity. So one was self-preservation, the other was curiosity. Curiosity part came from my professional background, and that was for the past many years, I have co-developed healthy products, healthy buildings that are healthy for people and the environment at the same time. Mm-hmm. And that includes, by the way, drugs, pharmaceuticals, because a lot of pharmaceuticals, better than anyone else, like 90% of the pharmaceuticals that we take, we excrete. They go out into the environment. And a lot of them are not really good for us. It's kind of like this cost benefit. Well, yes, it has these 25 contraindications that you can see when you open this big long thing on your, whenever you're taking a drug. The package comes with it with this big long thing of what you shouldn't do and how you're excluded and what the side effects are. So that's not really fantastic when you talk about, a healthy product. It just means that it's less bad than the solution that it's giving you.
That's right.
And so we started to look at that as well. And so the healthy product part is really important. Because today, when people talk about products and the environment, they always talk about reducing your negative impact on the environment. Like humans are bad for the environment. How can we be less bad? And we took a completely different look at this, which, by the way, is kind of on the same line that a lot of people are starting to get into today. But this was many, many years ago. And that is that, well, we know what we're against, but what are we for?
Yeah.
And, what we decided that we were for was redesigning products so that they are healthy for people, healthy for the environment, and healthy for companies that are offering them, so that it wasn't looked upon as a cost anymore, but actually a marketing opportunity and an inspiration to the executives and employees in the company. And it was phenomenally successful. We developed a methodology called the Cradle to Cradle Design Protocol, which has won many international awards. And it starts from the fundamental premise, what can we do that's positive, that has a positive impact? And we quantified that in terms of the methodology. And that's used in, it's been used to do everything from healthy buildings with healthy indoor air, to carpets that actively clean the air, to healthy inks on the labels on Carlsberg beer bottles that Carlsberg had on its homepage for many, many years. Because when the inks on these beer bottles, get wet, they wash off onto your hands quite often.
Yeah.
And you can get, an allergic reaction. So we actually redesigned the inks on that so that they wouldn't do that anymore. And Carlsberg loved it. They kept saying on their website, did you know that green is the most toxic color? Which is true. And our color is designed to be safe and healthy for the people, who are touching our labels. And it was great for sales. And so what we found out was that basically every time we came to a really good solution where the executives of the company understood the message and what it meant for the marketing, market share, profitability, savings, because we could also reduce the actual real number of additives that were in products, so that the company actually saved money because they didn't have to have as many additives. And that all worked, and it's still working today. So I then turned my attention to the toughest nut of all to crack, which was the pharmaceuticals industry, because the pharmaceuticals industry, they love to do green kind of stuff with their packaging, but don't touch the product. Oh no, that's medical. That's regulatory. No, don't touch that. We said, no, wait a minute. There's got to be a way through this. And so that's what started me along this whole path. Self-preservation and curiosity about how we could develop healthy products, especially in the pharma industry, but across, a whole range of products. And we started out, not to do the easy stuff. We started out with heart disease, which is the biggest killer on earth today, the biggest disabler of people on the planet today. So it kills and maims more people on the planet than anything else. And 1 in 4 people today is well on their way to heart disease. And in particular, what happens starting in your teens, actually, is that we all start to turn to stone. And that is to say that our arteries start to harden. A lot of people hear that heart disease starts with this gumming up of the area where the blood flows through your arteries. It's true in certain circumstances, and they talk about cholesterol and the fats that build up. But actually, in many, many cases, that's not where it starts at all. It starts in the wall of the artery, where there is a substance, an elastic substance, that makes your arteries flexible. And this isn't just in your arteries. It's throughout your whole body. It's what I call the elastic of life. It does many miraculous things, but basically, just for example, it will expand and contract 8 times its standing length and snap back in a fraction of a second, billions of times in your lifetime. It's one of the longest lasting and toughest substances in your body. So this elastin fiber is located in both in your heart also in your lungs. Every breath you take, every move you make is driven by elastin fiber. In your lungs, the air sacs, when they expand and contract, that's elastin.
Yeah.
It's amazing how many people haven't heard of it. So going back to the arteries, this elastin, the problem is after you reach the age of about 30, your body stops producing it. And the result is it starts to degrade. And when it starts to degrade, it sends out a help signal. Help me, fix me. And so you get the body doing what it normally does with injury, and that is inflammation. Now, we've all heard about chronic inflammation as you get older. Well, elastin fiber is a major cause because as it degrades, you get this inflammation. But because the elastin fiber isn't being repaired by the body anymore, guess what? It becomes chronic, and you get this chronic inflammation.
And that's where the immune mediated response comes into play.
That's
right?
Your immune response kicking in. Exactly. So your immune system, you're quite right, turns against you. And then when your body figures out that the inflammatory response doesn't seem to be working, on top of that, it adds something else. It tries to wall off the damage. Now, anyone who's had a minor damage knows, like a tissue damage or something, you'll get these little cysts. And like, for example, I froze my ear once when I was skiing. And so it's got surrounded by a hardened, calcified cyst. And after about a year and a half, it just popped out. And that's your body getting rid of this stuff. Doesn't work so well in your arteries because you can't just pop out your artery. So this is a defect in how the immune system works. In the short run, works fine. In the long run, with chronic stuff, doesn't work well. So this is something that is a little specific to Homo sapiens because we're a very young species, not whales or sharks who, some of them live to be 250 and 350 years old. Their immune system seems to have figured this out. Our immune system hasn't. And so that's why we end up with this hardening of the arteries. So just the sequence is this vicious cycle of injury, inflammation, and calcification that leads to hardening of the arteries. And you get this fiber also, fibrosis, building up in the arteries. And that provokes this immune response that delivers all of these inflammatory substances. Well, guess what is delivering them? It's these little exosomes, or these little tiny little lipids that your cells emit with the inflammatory substance in them. Well, guess what? So that inflammatory substance goes to the source of the damage, which is the elastin. But guess what's in the little droplets that are delivering it? Lipids. So you end up with a buildup of lipids.
Yeah.
And so
in
now
a place that you don't want the lipids.
Yeah, no, because that's when you get the buildup that also makes its way from the wall through into the arteries.
Yeah.
So this is a very different way of looking at the way that cardiovascular disease develops. And this is all by the way, peer reviewed, published. There's been thousands of papers published on elastin fiber and the arteries and how this whole process works. And one of the seminal papers was actually done out of Harvard University by Professor Elena Ikawa, who has a huge lab at Harvard. And she's the one who really detailed this injury, inflammation, calcification cascade. So, it's very well established, but not well known. And still today, not well known by a lot of physicians or healthcare experts as well. So, I started to discover this as I was getting into it, and I became involved in some of the, the research that was going on in a couple of companies, and started to look at some of the therapies that were directed towards this. And in about 2015, I came across a publication by a Professor Naren Vivahari at Clemson University, who had managed to reverse the calcification in animal models of cardiovascular disease by repairing and restoring elastin fiber, not targeting the cholesterol or any of this other stuff, but by targeting the damaged elastin with substances that first decalcified it, or unhardened it, and then actually restored it. 2 different substances.
Wow.
And the light went on because I had been focusing on this calcification and how to get rid of it, not realizing for about 10 years. I wrote my first book about it in like 2004. And when we were working with some startups, they spent about $15 million trying to figure it out and just ran out of money. But they didn't focus on this elastin issue. And then so I went back to doing the other healthy product stuff until something came up. And lo and behold, 10 years later, Naren Vivahari came along with this discovery. And I instantly, it was a eureka moment. I said, that is the missing piece. So I got on the phone. I called him up, and I said, I'm coming to see you. I came to see him, and we started up a company called Elastin Therapeutics. And that company today is the only company that uses Clemson University's technology to actually decalcify arteries by focusing on repairing and restoring damaged elastin fiber. Now, that is one therapy, but the exciting thing is that there are 2 or 3 other therapies. Some are in the market, some are in clinical trial, that use other methods to restore elastin fiber. So this isn't just a one-shot deal. Mm-hmm. This is suddenly a whole range of scientific discoveries. Anything from biodegradable scaffolds that you put into wounds that actually are coated with one of the building blocks of elastin fiber called tropoelastin that prevents scarring, because scarring is caused when elastin is damaged. So, there you have it. And just to be clear, we're not just talking about the arteries here. It's in many, many of your organs. It's in all your ligaments. That's what allows them to expand and contract. And it's in your skin, which is why you wrinkle when you start to get old. It's not the collagen. It's mostly the elastin that is degrading. People are told it's collagen, but it's not. Collagen gives your skin firmness and strength. It doesn't give it flexibility. The elastin does. And the elastin and the collagen are woven together throughout your body to form this meshwork that connects everything in your body that is both strong and flexible. It's miraculous. It's just a fantastic combination. So there you have it. That's sort of the story. And what came out of that was the realization that no one had really written about this, about these discoveries of this sequence of events, this calcification, what was triggering it, which we haven't really talked about, the types of things that damage elastin. We can get to that. But the result of that was this book, which is #1 bestseller on Amazon, called Discovering the Nature of Longevity, Restoring the Heart and Body by Targeting Hidden Stress. And in that, I tell the stories of the patients, the doctors, and the researchers who together are actually discovering how to restore damaged arteries, what does cause this damage in the first place, and what people can do about it. So long-winded explanation, but that's the long and short of it. And we'll talk about the eye in a moment, because the eyes have it.
well, there's a couple of things though that I think are maybe on the surface and maybe questions that people would have. The first is around what causes the immune system, or what causes the lack of production of elastin in the first place, right?
No one knows.
So, and to me, that would be what you want to figure out too, right? Like
exactly. That's exactly correct. You hit the nail on the head. The world's top authorities don't know why the body genetically does that, why it stops assembling this elastin fiber. The assembly of elastin fiber in the body is one of the most complex processes that you can possibly imagine. I'm not going to go into it here, but it involves about 15 different steps. It starts with the elastin gene, and then it puts out a chemical, and then that chemical is packaged into these little exosomes that then are sent outside the cell. They combine with fibers called fibrillin to make up this elastin fiber. So it's really a complex process. But at the end product, the assembly stops happening. The production of the building blocks doesn't stop. It's the assembly that happens. So you get a double whammy. Not only do you get
Oh, I see.
the destruction of the elastin fiber, but you also get these partially formed pieces of elastin running around your body called elastin-derived particles. They're EDPs, and they're causing a lot of trouble because the body recognizes them as a foreign entity. So
It's a
once
problem.
again,
Yeah.
chronic inflammatory response. So, all of these doctors scratching their heads over what's causing this inflammation, giving you anti-inflammatories and everything else. This is really a big part of that. It's not the only part, but it is a very big part of chronic inflammation as we grow older.
Yeah, the conversation around the immune system is one that's fairly complex in general, but it does feel like these autoimmune type responses have become more frequent and affect a lot of other body systems. Understanding its effect on elastin, though, is really, really interesting to me because the downwind side effects are fairly dire. I mean, when you think about the loss of flexibility in arteries in particular, and all of the things that we see from heart disease as being a number one issue for so many people.
Yeah, and what's I think really interesting about that is that you mentioned autoimmune disease is on the rise. It's certainly on the rise in kids. There's no question about it. And then we start to talk about what is it that damages elastin.
Mm-hmm.
And there are two things in particular that I talk about in the book, that there's all kinds of hidden stresses. That's the subtitle of the book, right? Restoring the Heart and Body by targeting hidden stress. And there's two hidden stresses, even though there's a whole bunch of other stresses. And just before I get into those 2 points, there's something called total stress load, which is not still well known in the medical community. It's better known in the alternative medicine community. It's not standardized yet. It's the sum total of all the stresses on your body: emotional, physical wear and tear, biochemical, nutritional. So all of those things put together equal total stress load. And that total stress load tells you a lot about your risk of getting chronic disease and aging. So this is a new area that has just been started to be explored in the last 5 to 7 years. And it's coming up, but it still needs to be standardized. But two of the factors in that total stress load are toxic metals and low-grade infections. So we'll talk about the low-grade infections first. So everyone, maybe a lot of people have heard about the stuff that causes stomach ulcers. It's actually a bacterium. It's called Helicobacter pylori, H. pylori. And it was discovered in the 1980s and 90s to actually, cause stomach ulcers. Well, H. pylori actually is also a sub-level infection that is almost everyone is infected with H. pylori, or at least the majority of the population is infected with H. pylori. That never seems to show up in a lot. It doesn't manifest itself as an ulcer, but now we're learning that as a low-grade infection that's not detectable with normal tests, that this stuff is starting to cause trouble, chronic inflammation. And you've heard more and more and more about the role of the gut, right? The role of all the microbiome, all the bacteria and everything that's in your gut. And a healthy gut is the key to, a healthy body. So this is the same thing. H. pylori is initiates in the gut, and it can find its way through to the rest of your system. There are other things like, chlamydia infections, gingivitis, the stuff that gives you bad breath. Okay, so these are common infections, but when they're tested for, they're tested for these, when it really flares up. But in actual fact, low-grade infection is causing trouble. You just don't know it. And you don't know it unless it's been there for many, many years. And so the problem is twofold. The first one is it's low grade, so you don't notice it until it starts to cause trouble. And the second one is we're not testing properly for a lot of these. So those need to be fixed. So that's one thing, is these low grade infections. And by the way, just for example, gingivitis has been found to be a factor in Alzheimer's, and unsurprisingly, because gingivitis is here, and Alzheimer's is here, so the migration of gingivitis into the brain shouldn't be surprising. But everyone's been focusing in Alzheimer's on this plaque stuff. Almost all of it has failed at the expense of looking at things like low-grade infections. And so that's why gingivitis and other infections like that haven't gotten much attention, because they haven't got much funding. And now, after 15 years of failures with plaque, it's not a total failure. There is some promising stuff, but they're sitting back and they're going, oh, wait a minute, maybe we should be looking at other stuff. So again, low-grade infections, we have to pay more attention to these. Then we get to toxic metals. So many of them are called heavy metals. Why are they called heavy? Because scientists call any metal that has 5 times the density of water heavy on the periodic table. No other reason. That's why it's called a heavy metal. And this is including things like lead, cadmium, chromium, tin, lithium, that's used, in all these lithium ion batteries. And a whole bunch of others. Now, to be clear, a lot of these heavy metals have been with us for thousands and thousands of years, and they've been in the Earth's crust for millions, billions of years. And ever since we discovered fire and agriculture, we've actually been increasing the concentration of these things, because guess what? Grains are very good at concentrating heavy metals from the soil. So we've been ingesting them. Wood is really good at actually absorbing heavy metals. And it's so when you burn it and you're inhaling the smoke from cooking, for example, you're inhaling these particulates with heavy metals. Same thing with wildfires. So no wonder people 5,000 years ago, when we didn't have an industrial culture, were still getting heart disease, because these things were still, we did have a technology, fire and agriculture. And so right off the bat, those basic technologies were concentrating the heavy metals. And so Egyptian mummies, 5,000 years old, they're finding these heavy metals in them, along with the particulates from smoke. So today, because heavy metals are so good at making electronics run and consumer electronics run, they're everywhere. And also they're in the pollution from the manufacturer. So more and more of them are getting into our system. They're getting into our food. They are in artificial fertilizers, for example. Pesticides tend to concentrate them as well. So they're in our water, they're in our food, they're in our air, and they accumulate. Your body can only get rid of some of them. The body has an enzyme that actually does grab some of these heavy metals, and you excrete them, but it can't keep up. It just is bioaccumulative. And one of the things that this stuff does is it gets into your arteries, and because they're feeding, the body with oxygen and nutrients and everything else, goes into the wall of the artery and starts doing nasties to elastin. So that's what causes this inflammatory response. So heavy metals and infections also attack elastin. So when you sit back and you think about all of that, you realize the incredibly important and understated role of elastin fiber.
So when you think about the total stress, so as you were describing the components, there seems to be a cumulative effect. And so at first I thought maybe it's a moment in time, all the things, right?
Nope.
But it seems like it's in more than one dimension. It's
correct.
What's happening now plus the cumulative effect. And you mentioned low grade infections and heavy metals, but there are also a whole bunch of forever chemicals now that we've been exposed to as well.
And you're right. And heavy metals have a very nasty habit of uh, having awful chemical reactions when they're exposed to these forever chemicals and all the other thousands of chemicals that are in us. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to get on the environmental bandwagon. This is just a reality,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so the real question becomes, how are we going to get rid of this stuff?
That's the big question. That's the big question. And it feels like there's a lot of attention being paid to both environmental things, and eyes are focused on things like forever chemicals as an example. But ultimately, if we now are understanding the effects these things are having on elastin, and we haven't yet figured out why the body stops producing elastin in the beginning, at least though understanding that they have this big effect and having some way of helping to restore elastin feels like we're moving in at least a better direction than we were, but without the ability to restore some of this elastin over time.
Yeah. And you know something? If there's any investors or any executives in device companies or pharma companies listening to this, it's about time we started making major investments in repairing and restoring elastin. The good news is that about $500 million has gone into technologies that are now in clinical trial. So it's exciting stuff. There's one, for example, anyone who is listening to this who has an aneurysm. 10 million people in North America are diagnosed with aneurysms. More people have them that don't know about them. Aneurysms are caused when, partially when the elastic fiber in the artery weakens and you get a bulge in the artery, and it gets to about 5 millimeters. It's ready to burst and it can kill you, or at least maim
Mm-hmm.
you. And there's no real cure for this. The solution has been, when it gets to that point, surgery. Surgery is risky. It's getting better, but it's still risky business. And so the work at Clemson University, one of them was spun off into a company that actually used one of these naturally derived chemicals, and that's where you get back to my thing on healthy products. It's a
Mm-hmm.
naturally derived chemical that kickstarts the reassembly process and the protective process for elastin. Actually, it protects the elastin so that your body can kickstart the repair process. So
Mm-hmm.
it works with the body. They use this, and they're now in phase 2-3 clinical trial, and they have proven that you can actually stop aneurysms from growing. And anyone who wants to know more about this should go to my website, which is www.calcify.com. It's CALCIFY.com, and go under the elastin tab, and they can see the link to this clinical trial that is going on. So anyone who is exposed, knows someone who has an aneurysm, you need to find out about this. By the way, I just want to emphasize here, this is not medical advice.
Yeah.
It's just giving information to people, and that's the key thing is so people can draw the attention of their physicians to this, because
That's right.
a lot of people and even doctors don't know about this clinical trial.
That's
And
right.
so it's important for people just to inform themselves so that they can know about it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, earlier I talked about wound repair. This was developed by a team at the University of Sydney in Australia. Dr. Tony Weiss, and they developed the scaffold that I was talking about before, which during surgery or in a bullet wound or any kind of wound, they insert the scaffold before they sew it up. And that scaffold actually regenerates the elastin fiber and prevents the scarring and the stiffening.
Mm-hmm.
And that is also in clinical trial. And it was bought out in the largest buyout in Australia's history for a startup, $250 million.
Oh wow.
And it was bought by a company that was then bought by AbbVie. A lot of people have heard of AbbVie. It's a very
Yeah.
large pharma company, and they're the ones who are carrying this forward. Boston Scientific, by the way, is supporting the other therapy, which is directed towards aneurysms. And between the two of them, and between the investors in our therapy as well, we're focused on arteries, which is the toughest part.
Mm-hmm.
You got $500 million in there. Unfortunately, our therapy hasn't gotten that much because it's not in clinical trial yet, but we're taking on the toughest stuff and still looking for investors.
Fair.
So all of this is happening right now. It's really exciting. So there is stuff that can be done. And it's not just on the therapeutic side, but it's also on preventing heavy metals from getting into your body. We can get into that in a moment. But before I forget, and certainly before we run out of time, let's talk about, you mentioned all eyes have been on things. Well, what's
Yes.
really interesting is, guess what? Elastin fiber is everywhere in the eye. And in your role as an optometrist, I'm sure this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked a little bit before we got started around the eye and in places where elastin is found. But I think it's a really cool thing to be able to discuss eyes and maybe the potential to actually both help prevent and maybe even restore some vision for patients over time if we can get this thing right.
Yeah. And now we're going to try a little trick. And it may or may not work, but I'm going to try and share my screen here. And let's just see if this will work. Okay. So here we go. So
look at that.
Okay.
I can see it.
Yeah, this is a diagram of the eye. We're not going to go through all this stuff, in case people go, oh, what's all that stuff? But I will, if you can see my cursor here, can you see it moving around?
It's moving. Yeah.
Yeah. And for people who are listening and not watching, I just want to be clear. The first thing that I'm pointing to in the back of the eye is the optic nerve. Now, the optic nerve allows you to see, and it kind of, it kind of sticks out. And amazingly enough, the optic nerve has to withstand a lot of pressure in the eye and variations in pressure and still stay healthy. The way it does that is it's coated with elastin fiber, and that elastin fiber keeps it flexible. But as you age and in glaucoma, it gets damaged. So that is what starts to damage that's when you start to lose your peripheral vision, is when, you start to lose that protective layer of elastin, which in turn results in the destruction of the optic nerve and the signals to the brain. So that's one area there. The other, and I'm just, for the people who are just listening, is the macula, which controls your central vision, which is sort of, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it's the flat area, surrounding the optic nerve. And it becomes really a problem in advanced macular degeneration, AMD, because it degenerates, and that's why you start to lose the vision in the center of your eye. Guess what? The layer underneath the surface of that macula is elastin fiber, which keeps the macula flexible. Now, what's not in this diagram, interestingly enough, and what's strange, it's not in a lot of diagrams of the eye, is something called, it's what controls your eye pressure, or IOP for people who've been to the eye doctor, which is intraocular pressure, right?
Very good.
Because your eye pressure varies quite a bit during the day. And so your eye has to actually control that variation. When it gets too high, that's when you end up with a problem. And that eye pressure is controlled by tiny little valves, for lack of a better word, at the surrounding, the edge of the eye. And that's the trabecular meshwork. Well, guess what makes that trabecular meshwork able to open and close and keep flexible? Elastin fiber. So,
and that's the part that's a big deal, right?
It's a very big deal.
You're doing very good, and I love the fact that you brought an eye diagram to the show, because this is awesome.
And apologies to the people who are listening, but I'll try and orally talk my way through. There's other parts, the retina, the sclera, that protects the rest of the eye. They have elastin in them as well. So you can only imagine what happens when this elastin starts to degrade. Now, our team has actually started some of the first research into restoring this elastin. And again, Anyone interested in this, I'd be delighted to hear from them. Anyone who wants to support this work, I'd be delighted to hear from them. And, we can talk about that a bit later. It's almost worth a show on its own. But this is really promising. And there have been experiments, and I have to say, none of this is published yet, but there have been experiments with one or two of these chemicals that I talked about. And the results have been interesting, very interesting. So we're at the beginning stage of this, but it's so exciting that we really need to start to get some institutional investment in this part of it. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. For those of you who are just listening, it won't matter to you. And so that's, elastin in the eye.
That's and so for Douglas, just for people who are trying to understand why we get excited about this prospect, let's just go backwards just a second. So in the diagram, you show the optic nerve, and you're describing that exactly right. It's all the signals are being collected back there. And adjacent to the optic nerve is the macula, and that's where the central vision is being focused. For in today's patient, when we're talking about glaucoma, which is essentially the damage that is caused to the optic nerve due to pressure damage in the back of the eye, we treat that by trying to lower the pressure. And we've got a lot of ways to do that, from drops to surgery to laser procedures. But you're really treating partly the symptom / not quite cause, because if the nerve could be more resilient, then the pressure wouldn't have such an effect, and we wouldn't get the damage. And if
the trabecular meshwork wasn't damaged, you might not have the rise in IOP in the first place.
And so that's why it's really exciting, is because you go from trying to lower pressure, the only thing that we really can control, to being able to prevent that pressure from even being high, or to make the eye more resilient so that the pressure doesn't have such a large effect. Either way, it really changes the way you think about glaucoma.
Yeah, and I've been talking to the glaucoma experts in AMD, and they're just floored by this. They say no one is targeting elastin in the eye. No one.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a good reason for that. Until recently, no one could fix it.
Mm-hmm.
and now, this stuff is coming onto the market. I mean, there's even a skin cream that's on the market right now called neolastin that actually restores elastin in the skin. There's other therapies that have existed for quite a while that have been effective to improve heart health, that have the side effect of supporting elastin. One of them is called Nanobac TX, that targets the flexibility in the arteries. And, that has been used. I've used it myself personally, and it's a nutraceutical product. So there's a whole generation, not only of new therapies for elastin itself, but a repurposing of existing both drug therapies and alternative medicine therapies that are having this effect that we just didn't know about.
Yeah. So if people are listening and they're now excited about it, right? Like they're hearing elastin, they're understanding it for the first time, where should they go to find out more information?
Well, the first thing you can do is go to my website, which is, it has two names, but the simple one is www.calcify.com. That's CALCIFY, as in calcification. And the other name for it is www.natureoflongevity.com, which is easy to remember. It's all one word. And of course, that's after the book, Discovering the Nature of Longevity. And so on the website, there's a tab for elastin, but also on the homepage, I've done a little video that's an inset that is about 5 minutes long. And it'll tell people about the basics, including what is harming elastin and everything else. And there's lots of links in the elastin tab to some of the therapies that are being developed, and all of that. So that's the place where people can go. And I just want to mention also, they can also go straight to Amazon, where the book is on sale, #1 Amazon bestseller. And they can just, type in Discovering Longevity, and the book will come up. So read the book, have a look at the website, and go from there.
And I'll make sure to link all those things in the description of the episode so that people can do that directly in case they didn't write it down.
Great.
So this has been absolutely fantastic. It's again exciting to get to talk about some up and coming science, and it's really neat to be able to talk about things that are in the eye. I don't always get to do that, and so it's kind of neat to use that part of my brain and really talk about this piece with people. And so I think there's a lot more for us to dig into, and so I think that maybe we will figure out a time and we'll come back and we'll talk about some other things, particularly as the research continues to advance around elastin and the treatment thereof.
Yeah. And, one of the things we could talk about is on a related topic is the trillions of tiny blobs that are floating around your body that I mentioned earlier that deliver these inflammatories and these lipids, but they're called exosomes. And every cell makes thousands of these exosomes. They used to think they were cellular garbage. Turns out they're very sophisticated protein packages. And,
Oh, wow.
and hundreds of different cells in the body manufacture different custom-made packages, and they're the things that send instructions to other cells. That is a topic on its own, but really exciting because there's a lot of these exosome therapies being touted out there that is a bit of nonsense, some of it, and some of it's very valuable. So that would be another topic for us to talk about for sure. And that's also covered in the book.
Well, then I really appreciate you taking the time today, and I look forward to us having an even deeper conversation later.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's shows like yours that get this information out to the people that need it that are the most important multipliers.
If you've made it this far, then I have to thank you for your time. I hope you've learned something new and enjoyed listening to the discussion as much as I enjoyed having it. I'd love to hear from you about the show, because we're working really hard to bring you great content, and the feedback really helps us get better. If you like what you've heard or watched, for those of you who are streaming out on YouTube, then take a split second to give us a thumbs up or a like. It really helps other people like you find the show too. And no one likes to miss out on the good stuff, so go ahead and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't have to wonder when or if there's a new episode. And until next time, stay remarkable.